Look at this. It's working. It's working. I made it work. All right. Hey guys, welcome to Cross Workshop. Now, my last video was a tutorial on how to set up a very basic RCS for your creations. That video is currently getting quite a bit more attention than I'm used to, and it's also getting quite a bit more likes and comments than what I'm used to. And one of you posted a comment asking if I knew of a way to make it work using the same thrusters for everything, which is what you're seeing right now, basically. I only have one thruster in the front, one thruster in the back. I can use it to thrust forward or backwards, and if I just release everything, then the thrusters are going to activate on their own to stop me. Now, when I read that comment, I didn't know how to do it, but I kind of knew in the back of my mind that it was possible. To be honest, guys, I thought it was going to be so much more complicated than it is. I promise you, after watching this tutorial, you will understand everything, and once you do, you'll probably think the same thing that I'm thinking, which is, wow, that was actually way easier than I thought it would be. Now, let's go ahead and start the tutorial. All right, so for the first segment of this tutorial, I'm just going to go through each one of the components that we're going to need, and I will offer a brief explanation as to the role of each one of those components. Also, one little thing before we start is I'm going to be using the word true when referring to a component that is active, and false when referring to a component that is turned off. So if I say, for example, that the speed sensor outputs true, what I mean is that it met its condition to activate and it is now activated. The very first component we're going to need is a speed sensor. Now, the role of the speed sensor is to activate as soon as it detects a speed higher than the value that you set it to. So in this case, we're setting it to a value of 0.5 kilometers per hour. So once we reach speeds above 0.5 kilometers per hour, the speed sensor activates whatever it's connected to. The second component we're going to need is an AND gate. The AND gate, the way it works is it only activates or it only outputs true if all of its inputs are activated. So if, for example, I was to set 15 different inputs into this AND gate, then all of them would have to be activated for this AND gate to output true. The third component we're going to need is the NOR gate, which is essentially the opposite of this one. This one always outputs true until one of its inputs becomes active. So if I was to set 15 different inputs into this NOR gate, it would output true as long as all of them are turned off, basically. As soon as one of those 15 inputs becomes true, this NOR gate turns off. Hopefully this makes sense for everybody. Now let's move on to the next segment. All right, I already have forward and reverse set up on this creation, so I'm going to give it the ability to strafe, and I'm going to do it one step at a time so that you guys can follow along. So let's start by adding thrusters, obviously, because that's the first thing we're going to need. All right. Now, to control these two thrusters, there are two entities that come into play here. There's the player, me, and then there's the speed sensor. We want to make it so that when I give it the command to go, the speed sensor shuts up. The speed sensor doesn't try to fight me. But when I'm not giving it the command to go and the speed sensor detects speed, then the speed sensor activates the thruster. So basically, we both have the power to activate it, but we don't want to be doing it at the same time. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give myself the ability to move those thrusters. So this one here, so the front is facing that way. So this is my left, this is my right. I want to set it up to where I'm going to be using the Q and E key because A and D gives me the ability to turn. It controls my gyroscope, which is right here. So this is my left thruster. It's going to be pushing me that way. I want to set that to the E key. So I'm going to go in here, set that to the E key, and then I'm going to set that one to the Q. So now if I go in here, I press E, I'm moving to the right. And then I press Q, I'm moving to the left. So that's the first step. Now I want to give a speed sensor the ability to use those thrusters as well. So let's go ahead and add a speed sensor to that setup right here. And to avoid confusion, I want to set it up to where this speed sensor activates this thruster, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. That way it's not confusing. So let's put one here, flip it. So now when this one detects speed that way, it activates this thruster. When that one detects speed that way, it activates this thruster. Now we don't want to set it up to where it activates it just like that by default, because that is just going to make them fight each other. I'm just going to show you real quick. I selected this, I went into its configuration, and now I'm selecting the thruster to connect it to that thruster. And I want to set this to 0.5. We're going to do the same thing here. Select the speed sensor, select the thruster to connect them together, and set this value to 0.5. Now, if I get out of this mode, now if I try to use Q and E, the two thrusters are going to fight each other. As you can see, I can't really turn one on without turning on the other, because what's going on is, let's say I give this one the command to offer propulsion. Now this speed sensor is now detecting speed on that side, so it's turning this one on to cancel it, and then vice versa. So what I want to do now is set it up to where when I give it the command, the other speed sensor doesn't try to fight me. So we're going to need an AND gate and a NOR gate for that. So we're going to add those into the setup. AND gate is the very first one on the list. And then we'll set the NOR gate is the fourth one here. So we're going to set them up on each side of the speed sensor. All right, so now the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to disconnect the speed sensor from the thruster just to prevent confusion later. So now we're basically reset to nothing is connected to each other now. Now we're going to set the speed sensor to the AND gate, this one right here. So now I'm connecting it. I select the AND gate while having the speed sensor selected. So now this AND gate is activated by the speed sensor, and I'm asking the AND gate to activate the thruster. So now we're back to exactly the same setup as before. This going through the AND gate to go here is exactly the same as going straight to here. Right now, this AND gate only has one input, which is the speed sensor. So it's going to activate as soon as the speed sensor activates. And then when this activates, then this activates as well. But we want to change that. We want to give this AND gate two different inputs. The NOR gate. That's where the NOR gate comes in. So now the NOR gate, remember, the NOR gate is always on unless one of its inputs becomes true. Remember that. So now we're going to set this NOR gate. Hang on. This one activates when I press E, which means that when I press... This one activates when I press Q. So when I press Q, I want this one to push me that way. So when I press Q, I don't want this one to activate at all. So I'm going to give this NOR gate the Q key here as its input, basically. So as long as I don't press Q, this NOR gate remains activated and everything's good. Life is good. The moment I press Q, this NOR gate deactivates. Now this NOR gate, I'm going to connect it to this AND gate. Now, this AND gate now has two inputs. It has the speed sensor and the NOR gate. So for this AND gate to now be able to activate, it needs both of these inputs to be activated. But remember, when I press Q, I deactivate the NOR gate. which means that when I deactivate the NOR gate, I also at the same time deactivate the AND gate, because now one of its inputs is now false. When I deactivate this AND gate, I also prevent this thruster from firing. So I hope this makes sense for you guys. This always true, so it remains true all the time. So as soon as this one becomes true, now both are active and the AND gate is happy and it turns on the thruster, right? But if I turn this one off, even though this one is true, if I turn this one off, now one of this AND gate's inputs is now false, which means it can't turn on, which means this can't turn on. I mean, it sounds complicated, and when I say it, I feel like some people might have trouble following. I'm hoping it makes sense. So once again, we're going to do it again here, right? So this thruster, is it already connected? No. So let's connect it to the AND gate. And then let's select the AND gate and connect it to this thruster. Now this NOR gate will also connect to the, actually, we're going to give it the E key here. And then we're going to connect it to the AND gate. And then the AND gate is already connected to the thruster. So once again, speed sensor connects to the AND gate. NOR gate connects to the AND gate. AND gate connects to the thruster. So let's just see if I set it up properly. So now I press Q. As you can see, the left thruster is not fighting me now. Now I release Q and the thruster just turns on by itself. Now I'm going to press E. The right thruster is not fighting me. When I release, it works. So now every side has the exact same setup. And now when I move, the proper thruster, every time a speed sensor detects speed in any direction, it's going to prevent me from drifting in that direction, and it's going to stop me. It's going to bring me to a complete stop. Now if I try to go that way, all I'm going to press now is W from now on. I'm not going to press anything else. You're going to see my thrusters fire up at random times. That just means the speed sensor is detecting speed in that direction, and it's trying to prevent me from drifting. Alright, so now that this tutorial exists, some of you guys might be wondering, does this make the previous tutorial obsolete? And the answer is no, absolutely not. I still firmly believe that there are use cases for each one of these two setups and where each of these two setups can shine. If you're a brand new player and you're feeling completely overwhelmed by logic blocks, which would be completely normal, I think that it would be perfectly okay for someone to choose to take it slow and just use the basic setup on their build until they start to feel a bit more comfortable using logic blocks. I also believe that the advanced setup is not always the answer. For example, if you want propulsion in the front and back of the vehicle, but you don't need the ability to strafe from side to side, then you don't need propulsion from side to side. So in this case, the advanced setup is kind of overkill for the sides, and you'd be wasting complexity on more logic blocks than you actually need. So hopefully this tutorial will be helping a lot of you guys, and please, if this tutorial ends up helping you, please mention it in the comments, because reading those comments really makes my day. So on that, take care guys, bye for now.